Some of you know that I was recently in California for a gathering of Unitarian Universalist ministers from across the country. There were about 400 of us at a conference center in California. Great energy, wonderful time, well worth attending. I'm so glad I was there. And I was really happy to come home. I was thinking as I arrived at the airport of the time that George and Janet met me there, not knowing me not knowing them, and little did I know the adventure that was ahead for us. I'm very happy to be here. On the plane on the way home, I started reading a book that I heard about through an old friend who has reconnected with me on Facebook. She moved to Israel right after college. She's my age, and she lived on a kibbutz for many years, and she's still in Israel. And she mentioned this book that she was reading recently, and I loved the title. So I started reading it on the plane on the way home, and oh my goodness, it just filled my heart reading this book. It's called To Heal a Fractured World. It's written by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. I pulled out just a few little passages from this book for our reading this morning. We are here to make a difference, to mend the fractures of the world, a day at a time, an act at a time, for as long as it takes to make a place of justice and compassion, where the lonely are not alone, the poor not without help, where the cry of the vulnerable is heeded and those who are wronged are heard. The choice is not between faith and deeds, for it is by our deeds that we express our faith and make it real in the life of others and in the world. So is it true that the ethical life is a form of celebration. Doing good is not painful, a matter of dour duty and chastising conscience. Rather, we make happiness by sharing what we have, seeing possessions less as things we own than things we hold in trust. One of the conditions of which is that we use part of what we have to help others. That is not self-sacrifice. From those who spend part of their time in service to others, we hear they gain more than they give. They don't want to be thanked. They want to thank. Lifting others, they find that they themselves have been lifted. The ethic of responsibility, says Rabbi Sachs, is the best answer I know to the meaning and meaningfulness of a life. The meaningfulness of a life lies not in what you take, but in what you give. To live well is to give. So, getting ready to preach my first sermon intended to inspire generous giving to our budget drive to fund our congregation's operations for the coming year, I went looking online, of course, for samples of other approaches. What seems to have worked for other ministers, I wondered. One minister who was pitching tithing to a struggling Assembly of God congregation began this way. It was essentially a threat of long-windedness. Brothers and sisters, he announced, I have 3 alternative sermons this morning. I have a $1,000 sermon that lasts only 5 minutes. I have a $500 sermon that lasts an hour. And I have a $200 sermon that lasts 2 hours. We're going to take up an offering and see which sermon you folks want preached. It worked. The offering was generous. The church got a very short sermon that morning, and they were able to get their bills paid that week. Another minister I saw online took exactly the opposite approach in preaching to a Presbyterian congregation, but he arrived at essentially the same strategy, determining that the best way to encourage stewardship generosity was not to threaten to go on and on, but rather to preach very simply and explicitly the shortest sermon he'd ever delivered, only 16 words long, lasting just 8 seconds, telling it directly just like this. Folks, the church needs money and you have some. Give as much as you can, amen. End of sermon. Me, well, here's the thing. I had already decided over a month ago, when the February sermon titles were due to our esteemed newsletter editor by the middle of January, that my approach was going to tie in with the UU Ministers chapter conversations that are happening this year. collegial conversations and meetings all across the country that are focused on the important and somewhat enigmatic question, whose are we? While specifically focused on ministry and the question of whose are we who live our lives in ministry, those conversations, I think, can be adapted more broadly to life in our UU congregations, it seems to me. Whose are we as Unitarian Universalists here in Brighton, in Livingston County, in Michigan, in the heartland of mid-America? Whose are you? I ask you each that question. Whose are you? What I was thinking at newsletter deadline time last month was just this, exactly what I said then for the newsletter. When it comes right down to it, the truth of our deepest values is revealed in our lives, the way we spend our time, our talent, and our treasure. Living in harmony with our values brings us peace and joy. And I think this truth does play out big time in the awesome community that is our CUUB. Because our contributions to CUUB, all that so many of us, so many of you, are doing to see that it thrives, are a direct reflection of how much we value its presence in our lives, how much we value our presence in each other's lives, how much we value our congregation's presence in our children's lives, and what difference we think CUUB's presence can make in this community. And then as I was beginning to write the words of my message for today, I noticed these words in the footer that Liz Fyrick includes on her emails. I'm so glad she didn't put it in her reflection. It would have been a spoiler. It's a quotation from Chief Arvel Lookinghorse. And I ended up deciding that the arrival of these words, or rather the attention that I pay to these words, was no coincidence. They are just too perfect for my purpose here this morning now to share them with you. Here's what they say. Each of us was put here in this time and place to personally decide the future of mankind. Did you think you were put here for something less? Let me say that again. Each of us is put here in this time and this place to personally decide the future of humankind. Did you think you were put here for something less? And there it is in a nutshell. We have a responsibility as individuals and as families, a unique responsibility as a Unitarian Universalist religious community in Brighton, Livingston County, Michigan, to personally decide the future of humanity. Our existence, the way we live our covenant with each other and with that which is sacred to us, and the extent to which we take our responsibility seriously in community, can make all the difference. Ours is a life-affirming, life-saving faith, committed to standing on the side of love. So whose are we? We are our own, we are our families, we are our communities, we are the whole world's, and we are the future's. There is a hymn in our Teal hymn book that says, we are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time. We are daughters of dust and sons of great vision. We are Hades. We are New Orleanses. We are the bullied GLBT kids who are in painful despair from being damned as abomination. We are the immigrants who are seeking a new life in the promised land. We are the inmates locked away in dungeons vile. We are standing on the side of love. We are each other's when we listen lovingly and empathetically to sorrows shared tearfully here in this very room some Sundays, and when we teach our children about sexuality in the context of religious relational ethics. as we do in our OWL classes upcoming this spring. Amanda and Brian will be leading that so ably. Thank you so much. And when we accompany our youth on their coming of age explorations and their efforts to articulate their own statements of belief and values. We were Jeffries when he told us of his struggles with multiple sclerosis, struggles that are likely to take his life prematurely. And when he shared about his rejection by his family despite his illness. Listen to me carefully, please. This congregation matters. It matters. Your presence here matters. It matters profoundly to each and every one of us. And that is why it needs your support. This is a congregation that's striving mightily to fulfill its promise and is doing so. Some UUs say they don't support their own congregation so very generously because they give their money to so many other causes too. But let me suggest that CUUB needs to be your primary good cause because there are so few of us. We are officially 68 adults. Most of the other organizations you might like to support have thousands, even hundreds of thousands of supporters. Our congregation has only us. And it has a mighty mission, a sacred mission. It speaks to the world's greatest needs and its greatest beauty. It speaks to our greatest needs and our greatest beauty. It holds up human dignity and what we can do to save an endangered earth. By establishing this congregation here in this community, our founders had in mind giving something quite precious to our children, something our children are unlikely to get anywhere else but here. Ours is a free faith, free of dogma, free of hellfire and damnation, free as we affirm the power and responsibility of the search for truth and meaning, and as we proclaim the inherent worth and dignity of every single person, no exceptions, every single one. We realize and call each other to accountability around the fact that we are part of an interdependent web of existence, a glittering, bejeweled web in which everything is connected to everything else. Ours is a free faith rooted in a powerful historical legacy of questioning authority and of heresy, a faith for which some of our spiritual ancestors died, a faith advocating for the dismantling of systems of oppression and the creation of a sustainable world in which we establish justice and equity, acceptance and compassion for one another, while affirming the right of individual conscience and pursuing the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. These goals, these yearnings, these dreams matter. Borrowing from the words of my esteemed St. Paul colleague and mentor, Reverend Rob Eller Isaacs, we dedicate ourselves to the lives of the young ones born into this community, believing each night a child is born is a holy night, and that each child is born one more Redeemer with the spark of divinity in each young heart. We pledge ourselves to be worthy guardians of these young lives, and we aim to build a community in which they may thrive, surrounded by beauty, embraced by love, cradled in the arms of peace. As they grow, we guide their youthful explorations. We listen to their faithful questions. We affirm the value of the questions themselves and help them to find their own answers. We help our young adults to wrestle with some of the toughest ethical questions and with issues of worth and identity and direction in life. We help young parents with their awesome responsibilities, and as we move through each stage of life, we're there for each other, providing listening ears, open hearts, compassion, and real help. Let us care for our aging and those who are dying, lovingly, compassionately, and in the end, when each of us comes to the end of our days, we each hope to be remembered well and to have our lives celebrated in community. One day, we may yet have a memorial garden where our own ashes will find their final rest after our lives have had power and meaning that came from the ways in which we gave of ourselves. our pledge canvas. Our budget drive this year has as its theme, building the dream. Our dreams can be made real, are being made real here in Brighton. And that will be our legacy. Every morning, I receive an email message from the universe in my email inbox. It's true, I do. I look forward to those messages with great anticipation. And here is what one recent such message said. Courage is about wanting something so greatly that no perceived risk can keep you from thinking about it and moving towards it. That's what I wish for us. Audacious courage and generosity, moving us towards big dreams. Please give generously in support of this coming year's budget. Each and every one of you is invited to participate in our drive to support the loving, powerful, effective Unitarian Universalist congregation we dream of becoming. If you have not yet heard about this campaign and you want to be included, please speak with me or with Liz Fyrick, who's chairing the drive, after today's service. Your presence matters. Your ideas for our future matter. Your contributions matter. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your faithful devotion to our ideals. Thank you for all your gifts, each and every one of you. Into your wise and loving and generous hands, I commend the future of this community.